You printed planner pages from two different designers, and when trimmed, they were different sizes. Or maybe you printed and trimmed 5 pages from the same file, but they still don't sit evenly in your planner. One sticks out, another's just a little too short. Most of the time, it's not your printer, it's your trim technique. These tips aren't about perfection, they're about consistency, so that every page you cut lands the same way, whether it came from one file or 10 different designers. We'll start with 5 tips for working with your trimmer, then 4 more for measuring and cutting with real precision. I've cut thousands of planner pages and ruined plenty learning what not to do. These are the 9 tips that made my cuts consistent. I just wish someone had handed them to me when I first started. So let's jump right in. It is tempting to cut as many pages at a time as is possible, especially when you've printed a full set of planner pages. But pushing your trimmer beyond its capacity can give you ragged edges and incomplete cuts, blades that wear down quickly. It can also damage the trimmer itself. With a guillotine trimmer, too many pages can catch against the blade, pulling the stack out of alignment, or even worse, twist the blade arm out of alignment with the edge of the trimmer, and then you'll never be able to get clean cuts. For cleaner cuts and a longer lasting trimmer, cut fewer sheets at a time. To use your trimmer efficiently, position it in the way that gives you the most control. If you're left-handed, that may mean turning the trimmer around so that you hold the paper steady with your right hand and move the blade with your left. You might also need to adjust the angle so that the ruler markings or alignment guides are easier for you to see. And for some cuts, standing instead of sitting makes it easier to apply steady pressure and keep the pages aligned. A sheet of printer paper starts with 4 straight edges and 4 square corners, and paper trimmers have 1 or more fences or stops. When you place one straight edge against the fence, the trimmer can help keep the next cut square to that edge. This matters even more when you're cutting multiple sheets, because the fence helps keep the stack aligned instead of letting each page possibly drift slightly on its own. Don't place your pages on the trimmer with most of the sheet hanging off the side. The weight of the paper can pull on the stack and shift the cut. Whenever possible, keep the larger portion of the sheet on the trimmer deck where you can hold it firmly in place. Many trimmers give you 1 or 2 inches of space on the narrow side with ruler markings, and this can be helpful for those small trims. If yours doesn't have this feature, like guillotine trimmers, or if it's a little hard to see beyond the blade and or guard on your trimmer, here's how you can measure for that short trim. Place the page on the trimmer with the blade down and the edge you want to trim resting against the blade, and the adjacent edge aligned against the fence. Note the full width of the sheet and then carefully lift the blade out of the way and shift the page to the right by the amount you need to trim. This gives you a controlled way to measure a narrow trim even without markings on that side. And this works with sliding blade or rotary trimmers too. The blade down position would be to place the blade somewhere along the length of the sheet before you lay the paper down. Slide the paper right until it touches the blade. Check the full width of your sheet. Move your blade out of the way and then slide your paper over to the right by the amount to be trimmed. Pay attention to the direction the blade moves in relation to the fence. If the blade pushes the paper toward the fence can do its job. But if the blade pulls the paper away from the fence, the paper is more likely to shift. With a sliding blade or rotary cutter, I make the cutting pass in the direction that presses the paper into the fence, and then while still holding the paper firmly in place, I return the blade to its starting position. On that return pass, I'm still holding my paper in place. I am not cutting the paper. I'm just returning the blade so it's ready to make the next clean cut. So the first 5 tips were all about working with the trimmer instead of fighting it. But the last 4 are where consistency really starts to show. Whether you are lining up a visual trimmer guide to trim marks or cut lines, or the edge of the paper to the markings on your trimmer ruler, the key is to be consistent. Decide whether the edge of the paper just touches the line, just covers the line, or sits centered on the line, and do it the same way for every cut. I know it's a tiny difference, but it's what separates pages that are the same size from pages that are only about the same size. When you are trimming the same size paper over and over, it's easy to slip up and mix up the measurements. I used to do this all the time with classic pages. I'd be going along, trimming to 7 and 9 1/4, and then I would accidentally trim at 7 1/4 or at 9. Now I just grab some washi tape from my stash and I use it to mark the measurements. Washi tape is thin enough that it doesn't interfere with the paper for when I am cutting the larger measurements, and it removes cleanly when I'm done. Trim marks look precise, but they are not always standardized. Different apps create them differently, and exporting to PDF can introduce tiny shifts. If you want your planner pages to look professionally trimmed, the ruler on your trimmer is still the most reliable tool that you have. Measuring does not have to be intimidating. A cheat sheet like this one can make it easy. I've got the decimal equivalents beside the fractions for inches, so you could easily go back and forth between the two to do any calculations or anything, or to apply them to the ruler. And to make that even easier, I've got a ruler here labeled with the fractions too. Now, if you use millimeters instead of inches, I've got that covered. Here's a classic size planner page that is printed centered on both sides of the sheet and is ready to trim. The cheat sheet has all the info you need to determine how much you need to trim from each side of a planner page that is printed centered on the page. The included example is also for a classic page, so we can see that we need to trim 3/4 of an inch from each side and 7/8 of an inch from the top and the bottom. But before I make those cuts, there's one last tip, and this is a step that protects you from any small measurement errors. The last trim on each side is always made to the finished size, not just to the amount you think you need to remove. So I trim 3/4 of an inch from one side, and then I trim 7/8 inch from the bottom. And then I'm going to make my final cuts by trimming the width to 7 inches and the height to 9 1/4 inches. That way, even if one of the first trims was a hair off, the finished page size is still the right size. And now I have a cleanly trimmed classic planner page ready to punch and add to my planner. These 9 tips are the ones that I come back to every time I trim planner pages. Make these habits and your cuts will be cleaner, more consistent, and more professional looking. The cheat sheet is in the description, ready for you to download and put to work. And if you have questions about your specific trimmer, paper, or anything else related to using and making planners, ask below. That's what the comment section's for. If you're working through the full printing setup, I'm building a playlist for exactly that, and I put the link for that in the description too. If this was useful, subscribe. There's more coming to help you print, trim, and build planner pages that actually fit your life.